And joining me now from Washington, D.C. to discuss this controversial allegation by the U.S. generals is a global affairs analyst, Calvin Dack. Good to have you join us.
Good to be here.
All right, let me start by getting your thoughts on this scenario, because Milley himself, General Milley, called it a strategic failure. How do you read what played out in Congress on Tuesday?
Well, I think that a lot of what happened in Congress yesterday was political. Obviously, the Republicans are using this to criticize the Biden administration. And, you know, it's not just the Republicans. If the shoe was on the other foot, I'm sure Democrats would have done the same with a Republican president. I think that probably the most revelatory part of what we saw yesterday was the admission that President Biden had been advised to keep a force of 2,500 soldiers there. And the reason why that was such a big deal was I think most people in this country acknowledge that the president has to make a decision. He doesn't have to follow the advice of his generals. The problem is that President Biden has made the claim and definitely made it seem that there wasn't this dissension or advice that he didn't take. So that part is going to be what really, really affects the credibility of the president and his administration.
I was going to just talk about that, but let's get back to the statement you made where you said this is political. This is the Pentagon disagreeing with the president, or saying the president, we did advise the president against what he did or the decision he took. Can you really term that political, and how far reaching would the ramifications be for President Biden?
In Washington, D.C., you can turn anything political. And, you know, to hear a lot of the Republicans particularly, you know, the same Republicans who, when Trump was in office, talked about, you know, the never-ending wars and wanting to end them, now they're telling these generals, you know, maybe we should have kept these troops there. And, you know, I'm no military expert, but one thing I can definitely say as an American citizen and as an analyst is that the military or the Biden administration or the Republicans have made clear what having soldiers in there for another 5 months, another year, another 5 years, how that would have been any different than what was happening before. So it's not really clear if they're advocating a continuing war or if they're really just using hindsight to criticize the Biden administration for political motives.
And let's talk about hindsight, because Biden did, because President Biden has said he cannot recall any such advice. If it was really advised against pulling out without leaving troops in Afghanistan, which of the President Bidens do you think went into Afghanistan? What was it, the overwhelmed Biden, a very strategic Biden, or a frustrated Biden that insisted on the Afghanistan pullout?
Well, I think this was a Biden that was trying to do what he promised he would do as a candidate, tried to do something that presidents from both parties have said they were going to do. Remember, when Biden was vice president, President Obama tried to do this 10 years ago, and he ended up failing. So I think that that was a strategic goal of President Biden. And what's clear is that I'm sure that President Biden weighed the advice that he received, but he decided that he was going to pursue what he promised, and we see the result of it.
And one of the issues that also, one of the things that was talked about in that hearing in Congress was the fact that they also warned of a civil war in Afghanistan. So they're projecting a civil war in Afghanistan. Right now, ISIS-K and the Taliban seem to be fighting some kind of, there seems to be crisis between ISIS-K and the Taliban. Do you think that could be, could be the beginning of the civil war that has been projected?
Yes, I think it could, and I also think that it could be a potentially dangerous mix that could threaten the United States for those who could seek harbor there in Afghanistan to, attack our interests in the region, or God forbid, here in the United States. Now, one of the things that, related to that question that I don't think anybody has really cleared up is, for example, when the Afghan government basically fled and let the Taliban take over. Why was that? Also, why is it that with the withdrawal, the conditions that the Biden administration said that it was insisting on the Taliban, one of which, was, of course, to keep these terrorist groups in check, why we're not enforcing that. And so that's going to be what I think people in this country are going to be looking forward to, because I think the chaotic withdrawal, that's going to die down, at least the news part of it's going to die down here. And I think most people are glad that we withdrew, but that civil war, that's going to be hard. And one other thing about that, and this was the thing that did make me uneasy with the hearing yesterday, is it seems that regardless of what you think about what the Pentagon recommended, it seemed that nobody realized it would happen this fast. And that's scary if our military leaders admit that they couldn't have even predicted this.
Absolutely. And you also mentioned the issues around the national security, which was also mentioned by the Pentagon, the leaders from Pentagon yesterday. The fact that America's national security is still at stake because of the situation in Afghanistan. Should President Biden perhaps take this window of opportunity and leverage over the Taliban to begin to have some level of talks in terms of intelligence about what's going on in that country? Because right now, the U.S. doesn't have eyes and ears on ground in that term.
Yes, I think the Biden administration should, although it remains unclear exactly what our leverage is. Because as you know, there was a little bit of leverage before the withdrawal at the end of August, because obviously that could have changed. So the Taliban was more cooperative. It's going to take real creativity. It's going to take real strategic planning and pushing of the Taliban by the Biden administration to figure out what we have to leverage them other than just coming back to Afghanistan, so that we can get this intelligence that you mentioned, and so that we can not only prevent a civil war in Afghanistan, but to prevent attacks against U.S. interests in the regions and elsewhere.
And what does this do for President Biden? You touched on what it means for him. But let me start with what it means for him and the Democrats in terms of leadership. Right now, the Democrats have leadership, and very narrow leadership in the Senate anyway, but leadership in both houses, in all three governments, both houses and the White House. The midterms are almost here. What does this mean for Democrats?
Well, the first thing is in the United States, and this is been true for most of the modern times, is we in the United States don't make election decisions based on foreign policy, very rarely, especially for midterms. However, the credibility problem you mentioned, that can contribute to people's trust of President Biden, which could affect the midterms. But, and this is unfortunate in ways, because I think Americans should pay more attention, when the midterms come here, this will be a forgotten memory. So I think that for the short term, politically at least, it contributes to that image that Biden isn't credible, which is what the Republicans are saying, or even worse, that he's delusional. As you probably saw in the run-up that you played, but also in a lot of the articles, one of the lines of the Republicans has been, who's telling Biden to do this? Perpetuating that idea that he's not all there mentally. This feeds into that. And so I think in that sense, it can hurt President Biden politically.
I wish we have enough time to talk about how it hurts its credibility in terms of global leadership, but my time is up. Thank you so much for talking to us. I'm Global Affairs Analyst Calvin Dack.
Thank you. Thank you.